Hey guys, it's Mrs. Yeagle again, and this is chapter 18 of Addison Cooke and the Tomb of the Khan. This one starts on page 182. As you listen and follow along, I want you to keep an eye out for those similes and metaphors we've been talking about. There were tons of them in the last chapter. I think my favorite was when they talked about Molly being chased by a dragon. So, chapter 18, it's called Good News and Bad News. Addison removed his school blazer and settled back in his seat. He was dismayed to find his dress shirt, one of his favorites, drenched in sweat. He cast a sidelong look at Dax. "My uncle says you have a knack for coming through in a pinch, but that was cutting it a bit close." "Hey, that wasn't easy what I just did." Addison decided to let the matter rest. The gentle sloping dunes of the desert were spread out beneath them like the folds of a blanket. The early evening sky was a darkening blue with amber glowing at the sunset edges. It was a decent world, Addison decided, as far as worlds went. "This is beautiful and all," said Dax, cutting in on Addison's thoughts. "But where am I going?" Addison was not at all sure. "Head toward Mongolia," he suggested. "Can you be more specific? Mongolia is a big country, and I like to know what I'm aiming at." Addison decided it would be prudent not to keep flying in the wrong direction at 150 miles per hour, so he pulled his notebook from his blazer pocket and handed it back to Eddie. "Eddie, take a whack at Sir Frederick's clue." Eddie stared at the cursive script Addison had traced from Sir Frederick's sword. "I can't read French." "You can read Chinese and you can't read a little French?" "Well, Addison, I can't read all the languages." Molly sighed. "We nearly killed ourselves getting this clue, and we can't even read it." "Do you want my help?" asked Dax. "I think you've helped enough," said Addison curtly. "Even if we could read the clue, it's hopeless," said Eddie. "The Triads have guns. The Russians have guns. We can't do this on our own. We should get back to civilization and alert the authorities." "Which authorities?" "I don't know. The U.S. Embassy, maybe the CIA or the Chinese police." "Eddie's right," Molly put in. "I'm worried sick about Aunt Delia and Uncle Nigel. We have to do something." Addison shook his head. "The Chinese police are on Madame Feng's side, and even if the embassy decided to help us, they wouldn't have any better idea how to find Aunt Dee or Uncle N than we do." "Well, we're in a plane full of bullet holes and we have no idea where we're going." "We will just as soon as we crack this clue." "Do you want my help?" Dax cut in again. "Dax, I appreciate your willingness," said Addison, "but we have established that languages are not your strong suit. You don't know Chinese, you don't know Danish, and your own dog knows more German than you do." He sat back in his seat and crossed his arms crossly. He felt bad for digging into Dax. Addison liked to maintain impeccable manners, and right now he knew his manners were extremely peccable. Dax flew for a few moments in silence. "I'll get us into Mongolia. We'll land at the first big city we reach and figure it out from there. In the meantime, you can all get some rest." Night fell as they soared over the ancient ruins of Gochang in the Mutao Valley, a gorge nestled deep in the flaming mountains. Raj patched up Dax's cuts and bruises with his first aid kit. Eddie ate the remainder of Raj's emergency rations. Addison read his father's copy of The Secret History of the Mongols until his eyelids grew heavy and his head began to nod. Toward midnight, once Eddie and Raj were asleep, Molly leaned across her seat and whispered to him, "Addison, do you think the black dark hat are real?" "You mean the ghost warriors Uncle Nigel talked about?" Molly nodded. "If you're asking me if I think the Khan is guarded by 800-year-old ghosts, the answer is probably not." He thought back to the vision he'd seen earlier in the alleyway, the Mongol with fiery eyes, a messianic beard, and tangled black hair streaming down his back. "Out of curiosity, why do you ask?" "No reason," said Molly. "It's just that I thought I saw something on the street today in Kashgar." Addison frowned, but his jet-lagged brain was too addled to pursue the thought much further. It was 3 a.m. when Addison woke to see Dax nervously tapping the instrument panel. He did not like to see a pilot nervously tapping an instrument panel. "Engines running okay?" "The engines are running great," said Dax. Addison sighed in relief. It's the rest of the plane I'm worried about. Addison contemplated this for a moment, but soon found himself drifting back to sleep. He awoke a few minutes later to the sound of the port engine coughing and sputtering. Buckle up, said Dax. Addison did so. He also buckled the special seatbelt for Mr. Jacobson and fastened on the dog's goggles. The tiny plane bucked like a bronco, one engine wheezing asthmatically. Talk to me, Dax, Addison shouted over the wind whistling through the windshield's bullet holes. All right, do you want the good news or the bad news? Let's start with the bad news. The bad news is there's no good news. Well then, what's the good news? I just told you there's no good news. Well then, what was the bad news? That there was no good news. Dax, what are you trying to tell me? We got an engine out. Addison looked out the port window. I thought you said the engines were fine. They are, but they stop working when there's no fuel. We're out of gas? Addison exclaimed. The starboard engine popped, stuttered, and sputtered out. The tank's full of gas, it's just not getting to the engines, Dax shouted over the wind. The fuel line was rusted through last time I checked. Why didn't you fix the fuel line? Maintenance is the co-pilot's job. Mr. Jacobson lolled his tongue and lapped at Addison's cheek. How were you going to fly a plane with a busted fuel line? I was going to buy a new one with the money you paid me to fly the plane. That sounds like circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is still reasoning, said Dax. Addison considered this. Wait a second. I paid you when we landed in Kashgar. You gambled away our fuel line money. Listen, there is no need to point fingers. There's plenty of blame to go around. What did I do? Asked Addison. You got me beat up by gang members before I had a chance to win our money back. The plane drifted into a nosedive. Addison realized the situation was getting serious. Dax fought hard on the tiller. To be fair, getting riddled with bullets probably didn't help the fuel line any. Can you get us down? Addison called over the howling wind. You think I don't know how to crash land a plane? I think it's the only way you know how to land a plane. Hey, listen, I may not be the best pilot. Dax trailed off. Was there a but in there? No, I was simply stating a fact. The plane lost altitude fast. Addison saw the desert rising up to meet them. Are we gonna die? Eddie shouted from the back seat. Addison did not have time to formulate a response. Dax, tell me you have parachutes. I do. Dax gripped the yoke with a grim determination. But they're stowed in the cargo hold. Sorry about that. Addison tried to find the right words to express his anger. The ground was hurtling closer. He bitterly regretted that Dax was going to get in the last word. Dax smiled. Don't worry, kid. This isn't my first rodeo. The Gobi Desert raced toward the windshield at 150 miles per hour. Addison shut his eyes tight to the sound of tearing metal as the plane crashed.